this one. So I'll read each sentence and then we will see what he's saying. Okay. Now, the strangeness of the... Yes, tell me.
Rangada, just before we start, I wanted to inform you something. Actually,
Yeah,
because sometimes you wait for me and then what happens is 8:20 I have to leave. So I listen to but I joined till 8:20. Before, I used to wait and then I used to get disturbed. So I joined till 8:20 and then I leave and then I listen to the recording when I repeat in the evening.
Okay. I have noted that. Thank you.
Yes, no, sometimes, it becomes disturbing, like why, so that's why for me also it was.
Yeah, I understand. Okay, that's fine. So, yeah, since the recordings are there, it's not so difficult.
Yes. In the evening, we have to, anyway, we have to listen to it once, twice. So.
Okay, so he has started the sentence with the strangeness of the play. So, let us see what he has said in the previous para before we start reading this. Okay, so I will. Yeah, so just 1 second. I'll read out the summary of what he has said earlier so that we get the link. Okay, why is he talking of strangeness of the play? So, if this theory of eternal imperfection in the world is accepted, then some explanations that could be offered are. He is saying that there are many who feel that the physical world is imperfect. That is true. But Sri Aurobindo says it is imperfect, true, no doubt. But it is not eternally true. Okay, it is changing. That's a game that the divine is playing. So, but if you think that the physical world is imperfect permanently, there are some consequences. And he is discussing those consequences and those theories. Okay. So, number one, it is a leela. Okay? It's a leela, a play. This is the first one. A play, an amusement of the divine. He pretends to be undivine, masks himself as an actor for the pleasure of the drama. This also we have discussed in Advaita philosophy. We have the theory that the soul puts on a body-mind life, which is the mask, which is the, you are playing a character. So you are identifying yourself with your body-mind life, and if you are a very good actor, you will completely identify yourself with the character that you are playing. So this is one. Okay, so this is one explanation. Or perhaps, okay, of course there are problems will arise from this, but he will deal with the problems one by one. Okay, so or perhaps he has created evil. This is another theory. Or perhaps he has created evil, suffering, and imperfection because he must create infinitely in this manifold universe. It's a natural consequence of his manifestation. Manifestation implies everything that is there in him gets manifested. So naturally, the extremes also get manifested. The good and the bad, the weak and the strong, the perfect and the so-called imperfect. All these things get manifested. This is the second theory. Third theory, or as some religions curiously suppose, he has created inferior creatures who will praise and glorify him in order to come nearer to him. But all fail in the end to do so. This is the theory. You have the same, that the divine is anthropomorphic. That means he is like a human being, but only much more capable, much more omniscient, much more omnipotent and omnipresent. That's the only difference. But he is like a human being. Anthropomorphic idea. So these are some of the ideas, and so these we have discussed that also. If you see Christians in their back window, okay, they put Allah is great, or they put also Christ is love, okay, but they are limiting themselves. Whereas in the Advaita philosophy, he is love, but he is also hate. But not in the sense that we understand. It's the two extremes of the emotion of hate. It's the great, but it can also be small. So that is the Advaita philosophy. So these are the consequences of you think that the physical world is permanently imperfect. Then he says, but this doctrine of Leela is open to the retort. Now the counter argument against the Leela. But this doctrine of Leela is open to the retort that a God who creates imperfection to enjoy it is no God at all. What sort of a God is he? A God who enjoys others' suffering is himself perverse. So he can't be the divine that we are imagining him to be. In the other philosophies, maybe it's okay. But if we posit that the human soul is a part of the divine and puts on this imperfection willingly, then the charge of perversity vanishes. That is, the divine is coming down here, but he is not making others suffer. He is himself suffering. The human soul is the divine. And so he is imposing the imperfection on himself. Again, that also makes you have to explain why he should do that. Is he a sadist or is he a masochist? So you have to explain that also. So all these explanations, that's why one problem leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. So you have to have a whole picture, then only things become clear. That's why the strangeness of the play. But if we posit that the human soul is a part of the divine and puts on this imperfection willingly, then the charge of perversity vanishes. The paradox still lingers and needs two suppositions to bring a reasonable solution. So you have to change your supposition. The first supposition that he was discussing is the physical world is permanently imperfect. Now he is saying that that doesn't seem to hold water because there are so many contradictions in that. So you have to get the solution to this, you have to have two theories, two tenets you have to hold. The first one, the willing assent of the soul to manifest in the world. The soul is not being forced to come down, or the divine has not created a soul which has been thrown into the physical world. It is the soul, human soul, which has itself decided to come down into the darkness. That's the first one. The willing assent. Assent in the sense of agreement. The willing agreement of the soul to descend into the world of darkness. Number two, a very valid reason in the divine wisdom that makes manifestation meaningful and significant. This physical world, there is a purpose for why he is descending. You have to take these two principles. If you affect, then many things we can explain. That's what we are saying. Okay. A very valid reason in the divine wisdom that makes manifestation meaningful and significant. Okay. So this is what he said in the previous part. So now the strangeness of the play. Why is the divine creating? Now it's very clear why it is strange. Why should the divine, who is absolutely perfect in every way, create imperfection? It's a very strange way of playing and devising a game. Okay. So, now I read each sentence. I finished reading the summary of the previous paragraph, so now we read the paragraph. The strangeness of the play diminishes. A paradox loses its edge of sharpness if we discover that although fixed grades exist, each with its appropriate order of nature, they are only firm step for a progressive ascent of the souls embodied in forms of matter, a progressive divine manifestation which rises from the inconscient to the superconscious, or the all-conscious status with the human consciousness as a decisive point of transition. So we'll have a look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 lines. So we'll look at each phrase and sometimes even words. So the strangeness of the play, we have discussed that just now. Why should the divine create the divine according to our conception? He is perfect in every way. How can he create imperfection? So, but if you have these two theories, then the strangeness begins to diminish. It becomes less. It becomes understandable. And what is that? The paradox. The paradox of a perfect divine creating imperfection. The paradox loses its edge of sharpness. The problem is not its solved, but its sharpness disappears. If we discover that although fixed grades exist, each with its appropriate order of nature. So here he is telling you that there are many fixed grades. Later on or before, he has already told you that I will take it as 7 grades. 7 grades. And the 7 grades in Sremdo's basis on which he proceeds is matter, life, mind, supermind, matter, life, mind, 3. Supermind, the intermediate linking device. And then you have Satchit Ananda. So Satchit Ananda, 3 on top, matter, life, mind below, and supermind in the middle, linking the two. This link has not been discovered by many. Okay, at least they have not spoken about it. Buddhism, Mayavada, all these people have not seen the link between the two. So this is what he's saying. So although fixed grades, the fixed grades we have just now discussed, matter, life, mind, supermind, mind, Satchit Ananda. Okay. Each exists, each with its appropriate order of nature. The rules and the laws and the nature of each one goes on differing. It's like different countries altogether. What is available, what is acceptable in one is not necessarily acceptable in others. Sometimes it is acceptable, but not necessarily. They are all different. Appropriate order of nature. They are only firm steps for a progressive ascent of the souls embodied in forms of matter. The soul is embodied in forms of matter. Your not only your body, but your vital and your mind. They are like 3 layers of clothes. You have in India we don't have many layers, sometimes only 1 layer, but in the West they have a coat, and then they have a shirt, and then they have an undergarment. So 3 layers. Okay. So you have body, which is the outermost, then you have a inner, that's the vital, and then you have a mind, which is even subtler. So these are the 3 layers, and you are putting on these clothes and becoming another character altogether and playing a game. And the game is real, huh? It's not pretension, because you have done it purposely. You have plunged yourself into the opposite, and you are slowly progressing. But you have lost your idea that you are divine, so that's the problem. You have to slowly recover that idea. How do you recover? By climbing these fixed grades. Okay, this is it. Progressive ascents, they say. They are only firm steps. That means they are firm steps, means they are eternal. The vital, the mind, and then the supermind and Satchidanand, they are very clear worlds that exist in themselves, and they are firm steps. They are permanent. They don't change. The only change is in the lowest level in the physical world. There is a constant change. Why? Because you need evolution. Evolution necessarily wants change. And that's the reason why the other planes of consciousness are not evolutionary. They are static. They are, what Sriranga calls the word, typal. They are of a fixed type. Remember that. If anyone wants to, even the gods, they want to evolve and go beyond their own consciousness, they have to come down into the physical world. Yeah, that's right. Then progressive ascent of the souls embodied in forms of matter, a progressive divine manifestation which rises from the inconscient to the superconscient. The involution has taken place, now the evolution is taking place from the inconscient to the superconscient. And in this journey, 3 things have already taken place. The first step is matter. Mind you, the inconscient is even lower than matter. So when you say matter is the first one, there is a little consciousness in matter. No? Even matter has got power, and there is a little bit of consciousness in that. Your body also has got consciousness. So the first step is matter. The second step is vital, and the third step is mind. So matter, all inanimate forms. Vital, animals. And third, mind, human beings. Now it can go beyond that. So, rising slowly towards the all-conscious divine nature. Okay? No, but sorry, I skipped a line. In fact, my computer jumped. A progressive divine manifestation. I am reading from there. Okay? Which rises from the inconscient to the superconscient and all conscient status. So there's a grade, you can see that. There's a inconscient first, that goes to the superconscient. Okay, superconscient, you can also speak of it as level 2 and level 3 also. Superconscient or an all conscient. Even higher into Satchidananda, when you go, everything, all constant status. This all constant status reminds me of a message that Mother gave once in a New Year message, I think it was. She said, you can realize the divine integrally when you know the whole universe at one time. Now, you don't know the universe at one time when you are in the level 2. You are not. You can't know. Okay? Because you know only one aspect of the reality. Either you see the personal or the impersonal or the saguna or the nirguna. So this all conscious status is the one that you know the whole universe and you know the manifestation all together. All conscious status. Even higher than the third level perhaps. With the human consciousness as its decisive point of transition. So Sridhar says that when evolution comes from matter to animal to man, man can now become part of the evolution of nature, but he can do it much faster because he has a will and he has a consciousness which is now capable of taking off. It's like the economy of a nation. Okay, in the beginning you are absolutely zero, and then you slowly start building up your economy. Slowly, bit by bit, you are building it up, and it reaches a point where now the economy itself starts generating more and more higher levels of development. Okay, in the beginning you have to add one. Okay, I put a factory for cars, I put a factory for chips, I put a factory for pharmaceuticals. It is then slowly developing. But when all these things are developing, now the factory for cars will also produce factories for spare parts. Then the factory for chips will also produce something for something else. And the pharmaceutical industries also will diversify. So it's known in economics as the take-off stage. Okay? It starts generating itself. Even man's intervention is not necessary in that sense. The government's intervention to put this, of course it continues, but it has reached the take-off stage. So in spiritual life, the take-off stage is man. Now he can impose the evolutionary progress on nature exactly in the same way. Okay, that's what he's saying. So, yeah. So we have come to the divine nature. Where is it gone? Superconscious, all conscious status. We stop there. With the human consciousness as its decisive point of transition. Sridhar puts it in a very interesting way in other places also. He says, nature, which is very not very happy with its own level of progress, very slow level of progress, brings man into the picture, and now through man, her evolution becomes much faster because man can do it consciously. Before that it was unconscious, but now it is consciously. So that's what nature does. That's what he says in another place. Okay, so decisive point of transition, important words. Man completely changes the nature of evolution. It becomes conscious. Before that it is mechanical and unconscious. Imperfection becomes then a necessary term of the manifestation. If there has to be an evolution, it has to start from zero, or at least almost zero. So there has to be necessarily imperfection in the beginning. Otherwise, where is the question of evolution? Imperfection becomes then a necessary term of the manifestation. For since all the divine nature is concealed but present in the inconscient, it must be gradually delivered out of it. Okay? Like a collapsible telescope, or like a Russian doll, or like a jack-in-the-box. Okay, it has to come out of itself and deliver itself out of it. This is what he's saying. This graduation necessitates a partial unfolding, and this partial character or incompleteness of the unfolding necessitates imperfection. An evolutionary manifestation demands a mid-stage with gradations above and under it. He is explaining more in detail. Imperfection is only a stage out of which you have to grow. So it's not permanent. And above and under it. Precisely such a stage is the mental consciousness of man. Part knowledge, part ignorance. the stone has got almost total ignorance. But animals come, little bit of knowledge comes. When man comes, it is part knowledge, part ignorance. A middle power of being, still leaning on the inconscient, because man has got a body and the body is inconscient, but slowly rising towards the all conscious divine nature. Not the word divine nature, cap. Okay. At the highest level, nature which seems to be mechanical and unconscious becomes absolutely fully conscious and not mechanical at all. A partial unfolding implies imperfection, and ignorance may take as its inevitable companion, a partial unfolding implying imperfection and ignorance may take as its inevitable companion. I've lost the page, once again. I got it. A partial unfolding implying imperfection and ignorance may take as its inevitable companion, perhaps its basis for certain movement, an apparent perversion of the original truth of being. Now note the word apparent perversion. This also, I usually use the image of when all the 7 grades are all different substances, mediums. So like air is a medium and water is a medium, and if you take a stick and from the air you put it into water, it appears to be bent. Okay? So when something is going from one level to another level where the medium is different, there is an appearance of distortion. The stick seems to be bent. Pull it out, it is not bent at all. So the imperfection that you see in the physical world is only apparent. Behind that, the stick is whole. The reality is absolutely whole, even in the physical world. It's a surface phenomenon. Okay? Very nicely it's explained. An apparent perversion of the original truth of being. For the ignorance or imperfection to endure must be a seeming contrary of all that characterizes the divine nature. It must seem to be enduring. Okay? So it has to, for the ignorance and imperfection to endure, there must be a seeming contrary of all that characterizes the divine nature. And what are those divine nature? Unity, all consciousness, it's all power, it's all harmony, it's all good, it's all delight. This is the divine nature. Absolute unity, oneness, absolute consciousness, absolute power, absolute harmony, absolute good, and absolute delight. He is using the word all means absolute. Okay, so this is the divine nature. But when you come down, it seems to be the opposite. There is no consciousness. The unity becomes multiplicity. Consciousness becomes unconsciousness. Power becomes incapacity. Harmony becomes strife and struggle and even war, outright war even. It's all good seems to be evil. Okay, and all delight seems to be pain and suffering. Therefore, there must appear limitation, discord, unconsciousness, disharmony, incapacity, insensibility, and suffering, evil. Each word, he has taken the same order and he is explaining. You can link the words together. Huh? Okay, so this is what he is saying. For without that perversion, imperfection could have no strong standing ground. There has to be a perversion, and that's an apparent perversion he has told you already earlier. Without that, like the stick, that is a very good example of how to understand this seeming imperfection. Okay. But without that perversion, imperfection could have no strong standing ground, could not so freely manifest and maintain its nature as against the presence of the underlying divinity. So, the imperfection maintains itself, but at a superficial level. A partial knowledge is imperfect knowledge, and imperfect knowledge is, to that extent, ignorance, a contrary of the divine nature. But in its outlook on what is beyond its knowledge, this contrary negative becomes a contrary positive. Okay. So that's interesting what he's saying. Let's have a look at that. Okay. But in its outlook on what is beyond its knowledge, this contrary negative becomes a contrary positive. What do you understand by this? The contrary negative is evil and good. Okay. Selfishness and generosity. In the physical world, we see it as contrary negatives. Okay. Strong and weak. These you see them absolutely as good and bad. But it becomes contrary positive. Now, that means to say it remains, like we use the expression, a weak, very gentle wind and a strong wind. Okay, the strong wind you condemn and say it's a storm, and the gentle wind you like. Okay, so when you go from the level 1 where it is contrary negatives, you go to level 2, it becomes contrary positives. Okay, it's very interesting the word he is using. It generates error, wrong knowledge, wrong dealing with things, with life, with action. The wrong knowledge becomes the wrong will in the nature. At first, it may be wrong by mistake, but afterwards, wrong by choice, by attachment, by delight in the falsehood. The simple contrary turns into a complex perversion. The one becomes the many. Inconscience and ignorance, once admitted, these form a natural result in a logical sequence and have to be admitted also as necessary factors. So Sremda is justifying the seeming imperfection. The only question is the reason why this kind of progressive manifestation was itself necessary. That is the sole point left obscure to the intelligence. Why did the divine make such a law? Is it possible that there are other worlds, other places in this vast universe where the evolution is not of this nature? That's what he is. In other places he says it's very possible. Why should the divine create only one type of evolutionary law? It could be that no evolution is necessary at all, or there need not be a gradation. So many possibilities. That's what he's saying in the last sentence. The only question is the reason why this kind of progressive manifestation was itself necessary. That is the sole point left obscured to the intelligence. Man has to, now he can question, okay, I have understood this so-called imperfection in the physical world. But is that the only way of doing it? Is the divine only creating this type of play? Can't he create another play? That's the question that arises. Okay? So, we have got 15 minutes more, little more than 15 minutes. We can read the next paragraph. A manifestation of this kind. Okay? So, who will read?
Should I read?
Yes, certainly. Go ahead.
A manifestation of this kind, self-creation of lila or equal lila would not seem justifiable if it were imposed on the unwilling creature, but it will be evident that the assent of the embodied spirit must be there already, for Prakriti cannot act without the assent of the Purusha. There must have been not only the will of the divine Purusha to make the cosmic creation possible, but the assent of the individual Purusha to make the individual manifestation possible. But it may be said that the reason for the divine will and delight in such a difficult and tormented progressive manifestation, and the reason for the soul's assent to it, is still a mystery. But it is not altogether a mystery if we look at our own nature and can suppose some kindred movement of the being in the beginning as its cosmic origin. On the contrary, a play of self-concealing and self-finding is one of the most strenuous joys that conscious being can give to itself, a play of extreme attractiveness. There is no greater pleasure for man himself than a victory which is in its very principle a conquest over difficulties, a victory in knowledge, a victory in power, a victory in creation over over the impossibilities of creation, a delight in the conquest over an anguished toil and a hard ordeal of suffering. At the end of separation is the intense joy of union, a joy of meeting with a self from which we were divided. There is an attraction in ignorance in itself because it provides us with the joy of discovery, the surprise of new and unforeseen creation, a great adventure of the soul. There is a joy of the journey and the search and the finding, a joy of the battle and the crown, the labor and the reward of labor. If delight of existence be the secret of creation, this too, one delight of existence. It can be regarded as the reason or at least one reason of this apparently paradoxical and contrary lila. But apart from this choice of the individual Purusha, there is a deeper truth inherent in the original existence, which finds its expression in the plunge into inconscience. Its result is a new affirmation of Satchidananda and its apparent opposite. If the infinite right of various self-manifestation is granted, this too, as a possibility of its manifestation, is intelligible and has its profound significance.
Okay, so he told you that even if we accept all the reasoning that I have given you, we can understand. Okay, now it is possible to understand the imperfection of the physical world, which is really not so. I agree. You can say. But there is still one problem that bothers you. And what is that problem? Okay, that is, why is this the only way it can be done, or are there other possibilities? That's the problem that he is given. Then he comes out with this problem is not solvable at the mental level. Okay, this is, I am saying this, but he is explaining in different way. But this is the problem cannot be solved at the mental level, because when you say that the divine at all, why should he manifest? What is the need? What is the need of play? He has got everything. He has already enjoyed the maximum. So what more pleasure can he derive and get from his play? He has got more than enough of play. Why should he at all manifest? So this is something that is impossible for the mind to understand. Okay? This is not possible to understand. So, but Siddhartha says, if you look at your own nature, because after all you are partly divine, so if you look at your own nature, you will see that you can extend that to the divine, and then something becomes possible to understand, but it's not a logical argument, because always there can be counter arguments. But it can be satisfying because you understand, okay, this is the reason. So that reason is that man enjoys a challenge. That is what he is saying. The joy that you get when you conquer a difficulty is great. Everybody. Okay. When you are a student and you are given a mathematical problem to solve, and if you solve it, wow, there is so much of enjoyment. Okay. So there's, or you are not able to do a particular task and you manage to do it, you are so happy. Okay. A mechanic, when he has a problem in his motorcycle or the computer, and he manages to solve the problem after some difficulty, he's so happy. Okay, so that's it, what Srendra is saying. So now that happiness and the difficulty can be taken, maximum happiness can come from maximum difficulty. So that's why the divine has created the maximum difficulty and he is going to enjoy the maximum pleasure. That's what Srendra is saying. You can, if you need not accept it, but you can see that this principle, it is possible to understand why this imperfection is there. Okay, but as I said, you can always argue against it and say that no, this is not possible. So this is not possible to solve the problem at a mental level. And also remember that at each level, he has told you earlier also, with it, each plane has got its own nature, okay, and own laws. So at the mental level, this problem is not solvable. Just as lower down if you go, you will see that the animal is not capable of solving certain problems. It can solve the problem of how to get food. Okay? It can search for food and get food, but it can't solve an intellectual problem. It's not possible for it because the consciousness is limited. Exactly in the same way, the human being's consciousness also is limited. We don't very easily understand this. The normal man who is not doing yoga or not familiar with the ideas of Advaita will not understand this. Of course, why should it not be? We should be able to understand everything. You can't. Okay? A yogi understands 10 times more than a normal man. So there is a gradation of understanding also. That's why this problem is not possible to be solved at the mental level. But if you go up, you will be able to see that it is possible. But there's an indication, and student has given the indication. Okay? They got 10 minutes. I start reading or we'll do one thing. I'll read the summary, which actually summarizes what he's saying here. Okay, so then yeah, I've got it. 1 second. So, in the summary, what he's saying, okay? He's saying the manifestation of spirit into matter as we see it in our universe, resulting in suffering and misery and imperfection, would not be justifiable if imposed on an unwilling creature. If you force someone to undergo suffering, that is not understandable at all. But if the person says, okay, I accept the difficulty. For instance, let's take a diver, okay? A diver goes into the sea and knows that it is risky, but he is doing it by his own will. So that's perfectly all right. Or take rescue operations, okay? Suppose there are some people who have been blown away by an avalanche, okay? There are people who take the risk of their lives and go and save them. So if someone is willing to undergo because the end result will be very happy for them, then it is understandable. That's what Swami is saying, okay? So it would not be justifiable if it is imposed on an unwilling creature. But if the embodied spirit itself has sanctioned it, it is quite another matter. Since nothing can be done by nature, Prakriti, unless Purusha sanctions and permits it, it is evident that the individual soul who undergoes all the suffering and imperfection has himself willed it. He has himself wanted it. The divine spirit and the individual soul have ascended to this plunge in the inconscient. But the mystery still persists. Why even this ascent to the fall? Why should it at all be necessary? I can understand that yes, you will get pleasure out of it. But why is it necessary at all? A hint for the answer can come from our own psychological makeup. Man can look into himself and see that there is some sort of justification for it. Is there no joy in solving a problem? Is there no pleasure in conquering a difficulty? Does victory over great obstacles not give satisfaction? The adventurous soul takes pleasure even in effort, battle, difficulties. And what greater pleasure can there be to man than self-concealing and self-finding? Does not separation from the Lord give intense pleasure when there is reunion? When two lovers get separated, there is suffering. But when you get united again, there is great joy. That's exactly what he's saying. Since delight of existence creates the world, then delight of self-discovery also may be seen as at least one reason for the manifestation. So at least one reason you can see that this. Okay, you can go on arguing, but we are giving an indication as to why it is seeming imperfection. The profound significance is surely in self-seeking and self-finding, even in the contraries of oneself. That's what he said in this paragraph. We still got 6 minutes, so what should we do? Shall we start? We will probably, but the basic idea is very clear now, no? So I think we can start because we've got 6 minutes. We can go even a little beyond the 6 minutes perhaps. All of you have got work to do, so we have to decide We'll start looking at it. Tomorrow we'll maybe redo it, but to understand Sri, sometimes redoing is helpful. Okay, so it doesn't matter. A manifestation of this kind, self-creation or Leela, would not seem justifiable if it were imposed on the unwilling creature. Very, very clear. Manifestation of this kind. What kind? Perfection on top, and this perfection creating imperfection. Okay, so self-creation or Leela would not seem justifiable if it were imposed on the unwilling creature. The divine himself has willingly taken on this. So that's one, number one. But it would be evident that the assent of the embodied spirit must be there already. The embodied spirit is human soul, okay? But it will be evident that the assent of the embodied spirit, when spirit can be unembodied, then it is universal. But when it is embodied spirit, it is individual, the human soul. The assent of the embodied spirit must be there already. For Prakriti cannot act without the assent of the Purusha. Chit and Shakti are always together, and Shakti has got power to create, but it must be directed and guided by Purusha. That's what he's saying, which is Chit. There must have been not only the will of the divine Purusha to make the cosmic creation possible, but the assent, A-S-S-E-N-T, agreement, okay? Don't get confused with A-S-C-E-N-T, which is the climbing, okay? The rising. So this is the assent of the individual Purusha. Assent of the individual Purusha, the agreement. I agree to what has to be done to make the individual manifestation possible. It may be said that the reason for the divine will and delight in such a difficult and tormented progressive manifestation, and the reason for the soul's assent to it, is still a mystery. The mystery is, why at all necessary? Why should it do that? Okay, that's what he's saying. And that's true. The students always ask, why is it necessary for the divine to manifest? He has got already everything. What more can he have? If he doesn't have anything more, then he is imperfect, because he has not got everything. But if he has got everything, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, then what else he needs? He doesn't need anything else. That his problem is, there is a mystery still. And the reason for the soul's assent to it is still a mystery. But it is not altogether a mystery if we look at our own nature and can suppose some kindred movement of being in the beginning as its cosmic origin. You can say that the human being is partly divine, and what is acceptable or what is possible to be explained at the individual level can also apply, he's saying, okay, can suppose some kind of kindred movement. The law of the human being will have a reflection in the law of the divine. That's basically what he's saying. So, on the contrary, a play of self-concealing and self-finding is one of the most strenuous joys that conscious being can give to itself. Look at the word he's using, most strenuous joys. You strain a lot and then you get the joy. The more you strain, the more joy you get. Okay. The more difficult the problem, the more the joy that you get out of conquest. That conscious being can give to itself. A play of extreme attractiveness. Even children play hide and seek, na? So it's a game that gives you enjoyment, hide and seek. And if you are hiding from yourself and finding yourself, this is absolutely a fact in yoga also, na? Because I tell you, when you discover some imperfection in yourself which is hiding from you, there is a great joy. Wow, I didn't know that this damn thing is there lurking somewhere in me. Okay, and you have exposed it. Then you get great joy. Okay, the imperfection, and then you get the decision. You make the decision that I want to get rid of this imperfection. But why was it hiding? Because we are unconscious. We don't know. Okay, there is no greater pleasure for man himself than a victory, which is in its very principle a conquest over difficulty. A victory in knowledge, a victory in power, a victory in creation over the impossibilities of creation, a delight in the conquest over an anguished toil. This is the nature of human effort, anguished toil and a hard ordeal of suffering. At the end of separation is the intense joy of union. This applies even to human beings. When two human beings in love first fall apart because of misunderstanding, the joy of meeting is itself very, very satisfying. At the end of separation is the intense joy of union, the joy of a meeting with a self from which we were divided. There is an attraction in ignorance itself because it provides us with the joy of discovery. Now, this sentence is very interesting because if you remember in the essays on the Gita, he translates the first verse of the Gita as a holiday of a fight. I told you we had discussed this last time. How can a fight be a holiday? But because the adventurous soul takes pleasure in difficulty. He meets it very happily, he takes up. A mountaineer finds Mount Everest very difficult to conquer, but he will go on. He will take pleasure in it. So that's why it's a holiday of a fight. This is the explanation for that peculiar translation of those in the Gita. There is an attraction in ignorance itself because it provides us with the joy of discovery. Okay. The surprise of new and unforeseen creation, a great adventure of the soul. So we have crossed our time by 8:36. So maybe we can stop here. We have almost finished. We have explained, we have already got the explanation for what is it. So the divine creates difficulties and conquers them by himself. It is not possible to understand logically, but you can to a certain extent understand by comparison. That's what I'm saying. If delight of existence be the secret of creation, this too is one delight of existence. It can be regarded as a reason, or at least one reason, but is apparently paradoxical and contrary to Leela. So I'm saying it's not a full solution, but you can understand to a certain extent. But apart from this choice of the individual Purusha, there is a deeper truth inherent in the original existence, which finds its expression in the plunge into inconscience. There are other reasons also, he's saying. One reason we have discussed, but there are other reasons also. Its result is a new affirmation of Satchidananda in its apparent opposite. So what is that other reason? The divinization of matter itself. The individual may get great pleasure from going from inconscience to consciousness. But what about the universe? The universe also, that also is a game that is being played. So that changes the picture entirely. One individual escaping and finding pleasure is fine. But there is a divinization of matter itself is the aim. That completely changes the picture. If the infinite's right of various self-manifestation is granted, this too, as a possibility of its manifestation, is intelligible and has its profound significance. The profoundest significance of evolution is the slow revelation of the divine in matter itself. We'll stop here, and next time we'll do the... Oh, we finished the divine and the undivine is finished. Now we come to the cosmic illusion. So new chapter, and this is quite a difficult chapter, but we'll see to it. Okay.